In just 47 seconds, $127 billion disappeared from EU recovery funds. Giorgia Meloni didn't wait for diplomatic protocols. She walked straight to the podium at the Rome summit and placed a classified dossier marked Next Generation EU Internal Audit directly in front of the cameras. The room went silent. Ursula von der Leyen's face drained of color. What did Italy's prime minister reveal that made the most powerful woman in Europe visibly shake? The confrontation began at exactly 14:23 CET during what was supposed to be a routine press conference about Italy's compliance with EU fiscal rules. Meloni had arrived 3 minutes late, carrying a black leather briefcase that seasoned Brussels correspondents immediately recognized as the type used for classified European Council documents. She approached the microphone with the calculated precision of someone who had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Von der Leyen was seated just 4 meters away, surrounded by her usual entourage of advisors and translators, including Chief of Staff Björn Seibert. She had been speaking confidently about Italy's remarkable progress in implementing green transition policies, her voice carrying that distinctive tone of institutional authority, measured, technically precise, and utterly convinced of its own righteousness. When Meloni made her move, von der Leyen was mid-gesture, her right hand extended in a classic dominance display. Without warning, the Italian Prime Minister stood up, interrupting the Commission President mid-sentence with a phrase that would echo across every European capital within hours. "Madame President," Meloni said, her voice cutting through the diplomatic pleasantries like a blade, her Italian accent deliberately thickened for maximum psychological impact. "Before we discuss Italy's compliance, perhaps you could explain to the European taxpayers where exactly $127 billion of their next-generation EU funds actually ended up?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and every person in the room understood that they were witnessing either political suicide or political assassination. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Von der Leyen's carefully prepared talking points crumbled in real time. Her hands, which had been gesturing confidently, suddenly gripped the edge of her podium with white-knuckle intensity. The practiced smile that had carried her through countless EU summits vanished completely, replaced by pure, undiluted panic. Behind her, Seibert was frantically scrolling through his phone, his poker face cracking as he realized this was a coordinated assault backed by documentation that shouldn't exist in public hands. Meloni opened the briefcase with deliberate theatrical precision, her movements calculated to maximize both dramatic impact and camera angles. Inside was a document stack nearly 3 inches thick, each page marked with the distinctive blue stripe of classified EU internal communications, organized with military precision using colored dividers and sticky note markers that suggested weeks of meticulous preparation. She lifted the first folder, holding it high enough for the assembled cameras to capture not just the official seal, but also what appeared to be multiple authentication stamps from different EU institutions. Her voice, when she began reading, carried the cold precision of a prosecutor delivering an indictment, each syllable deliberately enunciated to ensure perfect clarity for the recording devices scattered throughout the room. Project Horizon 2025, she announced, allocated $43.7 billion for digital infrastructure across member states. According to this commission audit, conducted by your own Directorate General for Budget, exactly $17.2 billion of these funds were redirected through a subsidiary company registered in Luxembourg. She paused, letting the number sink in. A company that appears to exist only on paper, with no employees, no office, and no declared business activities beyond consulting services. Von der Leyen's chief of staff was frantically whispering in her ear, but the commission president waved him away. She knew that any attempt to stop Meloni now would only confirm the explosive allegations. The Italian prime minister was just getting started. Green Transition Fund, Meloni continued, flipping to the second document. $84.3 billion promised to accelerate renewable energy projects. Your internal records show that $67.8 billion was processed through the same Luxembourg entity. Meanwhile, actual solar and wind installations across Europe fell 23% behind projected targets. Her eyes never left von der Leyen's face. Where did the money go, Madame President? Where are the windmills? Where are the solar panels? The assembled journalists were scribbling furiously, but their attention was divided between Meloni's revelations and von der Leyen's increasingly obvious distress. The Commission President's usually immaculate composure was deteriorating by the minute. Her trademark confident posture had collapsed into a defensive hunch, and for the first time in her political career, she appeared genuinely rattled. Meloni wasn't finished. She produced a third document, this one bearing the letterhead of the European Court of Auditors. This report, completed just 72 hours ago but not yet released to member states, identifies what investigators are calling systematic misappropriation of funds on an unprecedented scale. The court's preliminary findings suggest that up to $127 billion in EU recovery money has been channeled through a network of shell companies, all connected to a single beneficial ownership structure. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing the entire room to strain to hear her words. The ultimate beneficiary, according to these documents, is a private equity firm with deep connections to certain Commission officials. Her eyes locked onto von der Leyen's, officials who had access to fund allocation decisions before they were announced publicly. Von der Leyen tried to stand, but her legs seemed to betray her. She remained seated, her face now completely pale, as Meloni delivered the final blow. From the briefcase came a series of bank transfer records, each stamped with official EU authentication marks. The transfers showed a clear pattern: funds leaving official EU accounts, passing through the Luxembourg shell company, and ending up in private investment accounts across 3 different offshore jurisdictions. Timeline evidence, Meloni announced, holding up a calendar marked with red circles. Every major fund allocation decision made by the Commission in the past 18 months was preceded, within 48 to 72 hours, by significant trading activity in renewable energy stocks by these same private investment accounts. The profits generated from this insider trading total approximately $31.7 billion. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the cameras seemed to stop whirring as everyone processed the magnitude of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just political theater. This was the systematic unraveling of the European Union's most senior leadership. Von der Leyen finally found her voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. These documents, I will need to review. She trailed off, realizing that any attempt at denial would sound hollow in the face of such detailed evidence. Meloni sensed the moment of total victory. She approached von der Leyen's seat with the measured pace of a predator closing in on wounded prey, each footstep echoing in the absolute silence that had consumed the room. She placed the final document directly in front of her, close enough that von der Leyen could see the official EU watermarks without her reading glasses, and spoke clearly enough for every microphone in the room to capture her words. Madam President, this is a formal request from the Italian government for your immediate resignation from the European Commission. We can no longer participate in an institution led by individuals who treat European taxpayer funds as their personal investment portfolio. The aftermath was instant and brutal. Within minutes, Resign Ursula was trending across every major European social media platform, joined by Von der Meloni documents and our EU 127 billion. The euro dropped 2.3% against the dollar before markets could be stabilized. Emergency calls flooded in from Berlin, Paris, and Madrid as national leaders scrambled to distance themselves from what was rapidly becoming the biggest corruption scandal in EU history. Merkel's office issued a terse no comment within 20 minutes. Macron's Élysée palace went dark, refusing all media requests. Von der Leyen's security detail moved closer as she finally managed to stand, her movements unsteady and uncertain. She gathered her papers with shaking hands, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room, and walked toward the exit without another word. The woman who had dominated European politics for years was reduced to a silent figure fleeing from her own press conference. Meloni remained at the podium, calmly packing the explosive documents back into her briefcase. She had achieved something that many considered impossible. She had brought down the Brussels establishment using their own internal records as weapons. The Italian Prime Minister had turned a routine diplomatic meeting into a public execution of EU credibility. As von der Leyen's motorcade disappeared into Rome traffic, Meloni delivered her closing statement to the cameras. Today, Italy has chosen transparency over complicity. We have chosen accountability over institutional protection. The European Union can either clean house immediately or watch its legitimacy crumble under the weight of its own corruption. The implications rippled outward like seismic shockwaves. By evening, 3 additional member state governments had formally demanded von der Leyen's resignation. The European Parliament announced emergency hearings. Multiple criminal investigations were launched across 5 jurisdictions. What had started as Meloni's carefully orchestrated political ambush had evolved into a constitutional crisis that threatened the very foundations of European integration. The $127 billion question hanging over Brussels was no longer about missing funds. It was about whether the European Union could survive the revelation that its most trusted leaders had allegedly been running the largest financial fraud in modern political history. The special relationship between Rome and Brussels was officially dead. In its place stood something far more dangerous, a precedent that national leaders could destroy EU authority simply by revealing the truth about how European money actually flows. Meloni had proven that even the most powerful institutions become vulnerable when their own documents are turned against them. As night fell over Rome, political analysts across Europe were asking the same question. If the Commission president could be brought down this easily, what other secrets were buried in the Brussels bureaucracy? And more importantly, who would be brave enough to dig them up next?